Right. So we've now got another person with some first-hand experience. We can have Sandy Watson to come up now. I don't know Sandy, but if you could come forward, Sandy. Hello, Sandy. Thank you very much for coming up and sharing with us. The floor is yours.
Okay, so my name's Sandy, and apologies for having a script here. This is personal to me, so it's just a little bit emotional. So my brother's Scott Watson, and on September the 11th, 1999, that's 9/11 to any Americans out there, Scott was wrongfully convicted of double murder, and Scott's still in prison today, 20 years later. And his case is still, to this day, incredibly unjust. So, looking at the board over there, that's just a handful of people that have been wrongfully convicted here in New Zealand. And all of these people have families. They've all experienced police tactics such as trial by media, intimidation, manipulation and lies. All these years, we're still living the nightmare of what was done to us, while Scott sits in a cell, his life ruined. So we were just a normal, ordinary, everyday family. Tom, Scott and I had a pretty fabulous childhood, and we lived in a stable and happy environment, and we spent a lot of time together as a family. And in 1997, when this all happened, Tom and I were both bringing up our own families. Scott was a wonderful uncle to his nieces and nephews, and we all spent more time together than ever. Tom and his family and myself and my family lived in Christchurch, and we would regularly travel to Picton to stay with Mum and Dad. Then after a relationship breakup, my girls and I went to live in Picton. Then life changed for all of us. It all started when Scott voluntarily went to the Picton police station to make a statement. The following day, the mystery man was reported to have tattoos on his arms. At no time did any of the witnesses ever mention anything about tattoos on the mystery man. Then, one day, Scott and my children and myself were visiting Mum, and detectives arrived and requested we go with them. So I ended up at the Blenheim police station, and I was there for 9 hours. They started asking these really strange questions, and I asked for a lawyer. They refused. Then they locked me in a room for a while, and I was really scared. A lawyer arrived, and then I was able to leave. Just like that. It was at that time Mum and Dad arrived, and I was very relieved to see them. They'd been looking for Scott and I, and Scott's boat had just been paraded through the streets of Picton. The detective had told Scott, "We're taking your boat, and when the media find out, they're going to crucify you." We found Scott and went to visit lawyers, and they gave us some very good advice. They told us that the policeman is not your friend. From then on, we were followed everywhere by detectives and media. The police were using all their new anti-gang laws and mind games against my family. Our houses were bugged, our workplace telephones were bugged, and so were all the phone boxes in Picton. My brother Tom, who's just an ordinary wage earner, was suddenly audited by IRD. The result of that, IRD owed Tom money. They would turn up to search our houses regularly. They were caught breaking into our houses. They would follow me down the street, threatening to take my children. They would come into my workplace, and I would have to serve them while they sat there smirking. They were even parked up in a surveillance van outside my daughter's school and taking photographs. They were trying to ascertain the height of my children. They'd heard on wiretaps that the children had scratched the hatch and didn't think for 1 minute that the hatch had been open at the time. No, and they could have just asked for the height of the children. They went so low as to harass our grandparents who were in their 70s. They arrived at my grandparents' house one day, waving a piece of paper in my grandfather's face saying, "We've got a warrant to search the house." Grandad knew they were lying, and the only reason they were there was to agitate Scott. Grandad snatched the piece of paper out of the detective's hand and found it was a blank piece of paper. Grandad told them to leave. And the media. Well, the media fed their information from the police. And if the media was to report on anything the police didn't want reported, then the police will stop giving the media any information at all. In other words, the police have full control over anything the media reports in these situations. It is known that TV New Zealand journalist Emma Hart and Detective Tom Fitzgerald were having a sexual relationship, all helping to feed the lie. The police campaigned furiously to isolate us from our community. They went door to door telling our neighbours to keep away from us because we were bad. Here is a quote from the Kate Brett article published just before Scott's arrest. Off the record, however, Rob Pope told a select few journalists that Watson was their man, building a powerfully prejudicial picture of not only the suspect, but also his immediate family. Our friends, neighbours and community were all mostly supportive, and living in that small community of Picton was a good thing. Occasionally I would ride home to find a couple of live crayfish on my doorstep or a bag of scallops hanging on my door handle. On the day of the arrest, 5 or 6 detectives turned up at each of our homes and a further search was made of each of our homes. I packed up my girls and we went to stay down the road with Mum and Dad for the next 2 weeks. Those 2 weeks are a blank in my memory. I was in shock that my brother had actually been arrested. And the children, they've all been affected by this. They were preschoolers when this happened, and they've had to spend nearly their whole lives visiting their uncle in prison. They all have a good relationship with Scott and see him as a caring and loving family member who they can trust. They have a distrust of authority and are critical thinkers. Our children had to know about things no child should ever have to know about. Then further down the track, and Scott is eligible for parole. What a ridiculous system. The whole thing is rigged against you when you're not guilty. When you're not guilty, you cannot play their game. It's a catch-22 situation. And the corrections psychologists have a fair bit of input into that. Undue risk to society is the term they use, and corrections are sloppy with their paperwork. In Scott's file was found a report on another person who was born in Australia and was a sex offender. Scott, of course, denied being from or ever been to Australia, and so now Scott has been branded a liar by the psychologists. We produced Scott's birth certificate, but they refuse to remove the lies from Scott's file. So every time he comes up for parole, their error will be used against him. So more than 20 years has passed, and both paternal and maternal grandparents have passed away. We've also lost our mother. It's very upsetting that our mum, on her deathbed, felt she needed to apologise to Tom and I for everything we and the grandchildren have missed out on because of Scott. And that is how it goes. The police and prosecution have unlimited funds and control of the media. Around $10 million was spent to fit our brother up. And if you're relying solely on legal aid, that just means your lawyer has to spend half of their time being an accountant instead of working on your case. I asked a lady who has a family member who has been wrongfully convicted how this all has affected her family. And I would like to read you part of her response to finish with. Her words resonate. Sandy, this is so hard. I've tried a few times to write down how this affects us, and I end up in tears, angry and feeling defeated all over again. It's so sickening. That is the one word I keep coming back to. It affects us in the most sickening ways, both physically and mentally. The physical stress it has put on our bodies and the sickness we have all suffered as a result of that. The anger, so many raw emotions that will have no justice of their own. Once the police were determined to prove his guilt, it's been sickening to see how there's little we can do for him, which is why this has been so difficult to write. To face the fact that all over again that we can keep trying and keep fighting, but there's so little we can do for him in the short term. We know that this fight will take many years, if not decades. We've exhausted every avenue of the justice system so far and feel utterly defeated and sickened at the idea that the safeguards that should have been in place to help secure a not guilty conviction for him were taken away from him to help the police's case. So now, convicted and based on how these things play out, looking at Scott's situation and all the others before and since him, we know that the road to innocence is a long and difficult one. So we've got a very robust justice system. Once you're in it, you can't get out.